All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for the privilege of coming around a brother, sister in Christ and their children. We're going through a time unlike anything they've ever experienced in their lives. And we're grateful for the family of God, grateful that our faith family is more than just an academic collection of people, but that we are believers, brothers and sisters in Christ. And there's something that transcends the academic here that makes our lives worth living and investing in eternity. And we do just continue to pray for the Stearns family and pray for those family members who are traveling today, who will be coming alongside. Just ask that the Spirit of God might use all of them to minister comfort and peace and an inexplicable joy in the midst of what they're going through. We pray for our study of these missionaries and ask that you'd be honored as we do so in Jesus' name. Okay, I don't know if you looked at the course schedule for this week, but you may have noticed there's no class Friday. You happen to see that? The reason that there's no class scheduled for Friday is because my wife and I are going to be traveling. And it's a trip that we've been trying to take, and the only time it would work is Friday. This is the only class that I have. And so what I'm going to do, I've actually scheduled a quiz for this Wednesday instead of Friday. And it's just going to be over stuff we get through today, and then I'll probably ask about your reading. So it's going to be a smaller quiz, but we're going to go ahead and do it. That means you're reading out of the Great Commission book. We won't discuss the next chapter until a week from Friday. Okay. So sorry about the conundrum. That gives you a little break from the reading, a little more time to get it done. You know, I would suggest that on Friday, since you have a free period, that maybe you take that period and work on the presentation you're going to be doing in class, your biographical or your, country report. So you have a free period to do that. You can use it for whatever you want. I'm not telling you you have to, but if I were you, I would just assume, hey, I've got a class that day, and take time to get working on your report. Sharon, you're the first one up a week from today. So, we'll be ready for that. Okay, very good. Well, let's jump into where we are today then. And
do you have an attendance sheet?
Thank you. Thank you. My goal is that by the end of the semester, I'll remember to do this. All righty. We're going to talk about Francis Xavier. And again, this is Catholic missions, okay? And we've already mentioned the fact that Catholic missions need to be considered because of the influence of the Catholic Church during this time. And even though we don't agree with them theologically, there are certain things that they did that are worth noting, okay? So when you think of the name Francis Xavier, okay, do you happen to remember which Catholic order he comes out of?
The Jesuits.
Jesuits, right. And Jesuits just means basically followers of Jesus. And it's French word. And just keep in mind that the Jesuits became the strongest missionary sending arm of the Catholic Church. Other orders also sent, thank you, missionaries, but this is the most famous of all, and he is by far the most famous Catholic missionary of all time. He was born in Spain in 1506. So what's brewing in 1506? Is that one other date is close to that that's very important in our church history?
Reformation?
Yeah. Does anybody happen to remember what date is usually assigned to the beginning of the Reformation? It's the date in which Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door, complaints against the papacy of the church.
I looked it up. I actually did remember it's 1517.
Yep, and it's easy to remember the day, the actual day, because it's our Halloween. So October 31st, 1517 is the day that he nails his 95 complaints against the Catholic Church on the Wittenberg door. And so it was a monastery. And so it's really hard to put a specific date on the Reformation, because things are leading up to that and starting to happen. But if you have to pick a date, that's the one. So the next time Halloween comes along, you could say, well, for us, it's going to be Reformation Day. So 1506 is right on the eve of that. I mean, things are already basically starting to happen. He's born in Spain, however, and the Reformation begins where? Luther's from,
England?
I'm not sure, just ask Miriam.
Oh,
Germany, right. And and another thing to remember about Spain, remember we looked at that map showing the exploration? Spain and Portugal were the leaders in world exploration at that time, okay? So he was educated at the University of Paris, so he was born in Spain, but he went to school in France. And the sad thing about it is that when he first went to the University of Paris, he actually showed interest in more of the evangelical way of thinking, that which would become kind of the Protestant way. Remember we talked about those different groups. He really wasn't that interested in the Catholic Church. He was more drawn. He had some friends and things that seemed to pique his interest in the true gospel. But he meets a guy, okay, and the guy that he meets really influences his life away from true evangelicalism. Does anybody happen to know who that guy is? Dr. Paul has a degree from a university named after him. Between Miriam and Dr. Paul, you can get a lot of information about our study today. All right. Well, is a man named Ignatius of Loyola. Dr. Paul has a doctorate from Loyola in Chicago. Okay. But Ignatius is really the one who's considered to be the founder of the Jesuits. So he's a guy here at the University of Paris, and he's very influential. Loyola, and everybody knows him today as Loyola. Okay, even though his name was Ignatius, he was of Loyola, but people know him as Loyola. He very strong and charismatic personality, good thinker, and he gets a hold of Francis Xavier and he convinces him to join his group. And Xavier becomes a kind of a convert of his, and so Loyola becomes his mentor, and the rest is history. Xavier becomes the prize missionary among the.
So this was like a sect of Catholicism?
Well, no, the Jesuits are, the Catholic Church has a number of orders. You have the Franciscans, and you could probably look up and get a list of names of Catholic orders. And they are sectors within the Catholic Church, and they all have their own customs and practices, but they all believe basic doctrine of the Catholic Church. So the Jesuits becomes another group within. It's kind of like you have evangelicalism, but you got a number of different groups within the broader term of evangelicalism. Or you have the Protestants, and within that you've got different groups that we talked about. So, but they're all Catholics. They're all loyal to the Pope, the Catholic Church. Yeah. So this is the newest one that he starts. So as a result of joining up with Loyola, he ends up taking a vow of poverty and celibacy. Okay, and I think we mentioned this the other day. The Catholic Church didn't become all that it is today overnight. It was literally hundreds of years where this is added and that is added. Little by little it becomes what it is today. And actually, if you stop and think about it, the Roman Catholic Church never has really crystallized. I mean, even today, the Pope, who's from where? Does anybody know what country the Pope is from? He's Argentine, and he is very progressive in his thinking. And so, the Catholic Church, in fact, many in the Catholic Church today are actually challenging him on some of the things, especially laxity concerning the moral revolutions going on, and gender identity and all that, just really upsetting some of the people in the Catholic Church. So there's a lot of changes going on. But by this time, in the 1500s, by the time Xavier goes to college, obviously the Protestant Reformation has already taken place, because Luther nailed his theses in 1517. That means this guy would have only been 11. I get that right? Yeah. No. My math is horrible. Yeah. 11, 15, 17.
You're right. Yeah, I was just thinking, I zoned out too. I was thinking, okay. That's right.
17 minus 6.
That's why.
11. this is terrible.
Really not
This
busted.
is horrible. Don't tell the math teacher. So when he becomes a follower of Loyola and the Jesuits, and remember that one of the reasons the Jesuits began was as part of the Counter-Reformation. Okay, the Catholic Church didn't just sit back and say, "Well, we're losing people, but hey, we still got a big church." No. They countered this, and Council of Trent, you may have studied in church history, that was formed in order to combat what was going on. So the Jesuit movement, in part, contributes to the Counter-Reformation. So Catholic missions, ironically, was fueled by the Reformation. One of their ways of getting back. So here you got, Xavier, who's actually leaning at first more toward the Protestant ideas until Loyola gets a hold of him and straightens him out. Not really. So here's a little bit about these guys. I just thought it might be interesting for you to see a little bit. This is in your notes. He became known as Ignatius of Loyola, and names changed, we translate. He was born in 1491, which ironically is 1 year before Columbus sails, right? In 1492. He was a soldier until he was 30 years old. And then he got injured and he found himself contemplating spiritual matters more. After a period of reflection in the caves of northern Spain, developed his spiritual exercises. While studying for the priesthood in Paris, he met Francis Xavier, as we said, and a guy named Pierre Favre, no relation to Brett Favre, who used to quarterback the Vikings. I don't think so. And the foundations of the Society of Jesus were laid. That's what it really means. Jesuit means Society of Jesus. He died July 31st, 1556. So, at the bottom, Francis Xavier was born April 7, 1506. And so you can see he was a bit younger. And after meeting Loyola and Favre in Paris, he became one of the 7 men who took vows at Montmartre, which kind of means Mother Mountain or something like that, in 1534, that led to the founding of the Society of Jesus. After working among the poor in Italy, he sailed for the Far East in 1541. So he doesn't just become a missionary there in that location. He actually becomes a foreign missionary going all the way. We'll see where he ends up. Well, here, next 14 years, he brought the gospel to India, Japan, and other parts of Asia, and is recognized by the Catholics as the greatest missionary since St. Paul. He died on the island of Sanxian near China on December 2nd, 1552. So he actually dies a little bit before Loyola. Now you notice it says he brought the gospel to India. Okay, this is not coming from an evangelical source. We would not say that he brought the gospel to India by observing what he did in his missionary activity. Okay, so you really should know those 2 names, Loyola and Xavier. Okay, so one thing interesting about him is he doesn't have any visions when it comes to feeling called to the ministry. Give me the name of somebody that responded with visions or was influenced by visions. Who? Raymond Lull, right. And there were lots of other. We didn't study Patrick, St. Patrick, but that was kind of an in thing. But not with him. With Xavier, there were no visions. So where did he serve? He served in India, Malaysia, and Japan. And I wish we could say that his ministry was a gospel preaching ministry, but it really wasn't.
So what was his call to him?
Okay, well, how did he get? Well, I think it was more of a rational decision. In other words, if he saw the need, Loyola probably was behind a lot of it too, you know, and so it was more that way. He dies in 1552. He had a 10-year ministry. Now, the Catholics consider him the greatest missionary since the Apostle Paul. I just want you to think about that for a moment when we consider his ministry. First of all, it's only 10 years. And Paul ministered probably for about 30 or so.
You can go back.
Oh, sorry, sure. Does let's see, you guys, yeah, you haven't, you read this part yet? I can't remember. This was part of your reading for today, wasn't it? I think it ended with Xavier.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything about his ministry? Do you remember reading about these ministries? Anything particular stand out about them? Looks like everybody read it. So, anything come to mind about his ministry?
Didn't he mostly just reach out to kids and then make them say chants? And the kids would go and make other people say, like, recite things. And that's how they all got saved. And then he just baptized people.
Yeah, in the big picture, Sharon, the bulk of his ministry was to children. Now, anything wrong with that? No, but do you remember what compelled him to transition more to children's ministry? We were talking, you're interested in children's ministry, right? So that's very legitimate ministry. But there's something interesting about him regarding the reason why he decided to minister more to children.
I think it said something about like you realize children are more easily swayed or like more easily, in some terms, manipulated, or like he could like control them easier.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He really struggled in trying to reach adults. And you remember, what was his goal? What's the goal of anybody ministering in the Catholic Church, any Catholic missionary?
Wasn't his goal like baptism?
Right, because what did baptism do?
Is the person
Yeah, I mean,
like cleanse them, I guess.
pardon me?
It like cleanse them.
Yeah, they did believe that baptism was a means of salvation. And thinking about the Catholic Church, what else did baptism do?
Did it make them a member
Yeah.
of the church?
Yeah, it brought them under the control, the umbrella of the papacy, which, what is the Pope, what is the Catholic Church trying to do? It's trying to build a kingdom on earth. Just remember that one of the problems with the Catholic Church is that they had this mentality that they were building Christ's kingdom. And they believed that to do that, there had to be religious and political marriage, right? And so some of the reformers were guilty of that too. Remember, we talked about that last week from our reading. Some of them believed that they were also establishing Christ's kingdom, but they felt they were doing it through the true preaching of the gospel, whereas the Catholic Church was just getting people baptized into the church. It's very, very interesting. So you want to make the Catholic Church happy? You want to be a successful Catholic missionary? You get people baptized. That populates the Catholic Church. He was frustrated in his attempts to do that with adults because he just wasn't getting a lot of people. And so he reverts to a children's ministry in order to, you know, if Laurel, you used the word manipulate, and I think there was a lot of that, got them to submit to baptism. Yeah.
He was mostly baptizing children and infants then, right?
Yes. Yes. And many, many of them. Yep.
Would that mean like their parents would have to bring them and give him permission to do so, or was he doing it like without their parents' permission? Because you'd think like if the parents give them permission, they would be interested in the same thing or like supported, and he was struggling with adults.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wonder if a lot of the children he was ministering to were children that were orphans or had, broken homes and things like that. Probably not primarily children from healthy, happy families. That's probably an unfair statement too, but yeah, it's a good question. In 1510, so now remember, at this time, in 1510, how old is Xavier?
Or
Yeah, he's born in 1506. So this is going back to something that happened, he was just a young boy. The Portuguese defeated the ruling Bijapur kings in India with the help of a local ally, Himalaya, leading to the establishment of a permanent settlement in Velha, Goa. Now, why are we calling attention to this little tiny red dot right here? Okay? Even though that's a tiny little red dot, it represented a huge settlement of the Roman Catholic Church in India. Just think about India, dominated by what religion? Not yet. Never really dominated by the Catholics, but what's the Hinduism, right? Catholic, Hinduism in mainland India, that whole region. And so, the Christianity in any form is virtually unknown. Okay. Now there is a tradition that one of the disciples of Jesus actually went to India. Who was that? Do you remember which one? And many believe that it's fairly well substantiated that he actually did go there. I doubt you'll get this right.
Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas. I was hoping you'd bite on that. Yeah, Thomas, and there seems to be some decent historical evidence that Thomas actually did go to India with the gospel. Okay, but in fact, this little settlement here was so significant that people actually began calling it the Rome of the East. So, it really, I've never been there, but I've talked to people who've been there, and I've seen some pictures, and it still, even today, looks very Portuguese. It's a very European looking area in India, which is not common there. So this is kind of their foothold, their beachhead in this area. Today, how Catholic is India? Well, not very, but there is a significant Catholic population, Christian, but that was, and he arrived there in 1542.
So is the Catholic population just pretty much in that area then?
That's also a good question. I don't know much about the distribution of Catholicism in India. Okay, I do know that in general, Christianity has taken a foothold in. Well, actually, I really can't say that. There are pockets of Christianity in India. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a percentage for you on that. Okay. We're going to switch. So basically, why is Xavier, if his main ministry was to children, one of the reasons he didn't stay in one place because he had a hard time being successful. But when he, finally became successful baptizing many children, there were some of those children that grew up to be faithful disciples, and they followed him, the Catholic disciples. But he's not known just in these locations. For instance, even in Latin America, his name is a household word among Catholics. There are some people that name their children Javier. It would be Xavier in Portuguese, Javier in Spanish. So his fame spread to other places. And really most of his fruit was baptisms of children. But the Catholic Church, really bought into that, and he did influence other people by his example to follow suit. So sad, story, you know, just, in fact, she makes a comment here. Let me just find it real quickly about those baptisms. Let's, here, I'm on page 63. That last full paragraph down there, about in the middle, with less than 24 hours warning, he was on his way. He arrived in the port city of Goa, that's this little red place here in India, in 1542, where he found a morally corrupt society influenced far more by European culture than by religion. European culture being the Portuguese who were there. Xavier was frustrated and wondering how such people could be brought to Christ. He soon discovered that a ministry focused on children was more effective than one focused on adults, for obvious reasons. Children were more easily swayed than their parents, and it was his hope that he and the priest who would follow him would train them from early childhood to become effective Christian leaders in their own communities. This strategy was one he would follow during most of his missionary career. Okay, but notice he didn't even stay there very long. He had some conflicts with Jews and Muslims, and so he goes to the king. The next page, he goes to the king of Portugal to introduce the Inquisition and force the people to adhere to Catholic dogma and morality. But before that could be arranged, he left seeking a more fruitful vineyard. I want to be where there are out-and-out pagans, he wrote, believing that in such an environment, conversions would come more easily. Okay, so on and so forth. Just above the picture, there's a sentence that says, yet baptism was to him the most important aspect of the ministry. He would not deny anyone, no matter how tired he was. Let me just read out a little more. This is really interesting. Appealing to Loyola for more workers, he wrote, in these heathen places, the only education necessary is to be able to teach the prayers and to go about baptizing little ones who now die in great numbers without the sacrament, because we cannot be everywhere at once to succor them. So he's baptizing them, he's teaching them recited prayers, memorized prayers. I may have mentioned to you before, we were in Brazil when our son Daniel was born. Some of the Catholics that lived around us were appalled that we didn't get him baptized, because if a baby dies before being baptized, he dies pagan and goes to hell. And we tried to explain to them why. So that was his mode of operation. And he becomes the most famous, and in the eyes of the Catholics, second only to the Apostle Paul. So I just, yeah, it's really hard to, that's what we're up against. All right, we're going to switch gears. Even though this is on the schedule for Wednesday, I'm liking staying just a little bit ahead. So we're going to switch gears now to Native American missions. I've had enough of Catholic missions anyway. I don't know about you. So let's talk about Native American missions. Okay. So what do we call Native Americans? Okay. Yeah, at least we used to, right? As we mentioned on Friday, that is no longer politically correct. Cleveland Indians had to change their name. The Washington Redskins had to change their name. And, Native Americans. So I'm trying just to call them Native Americans. Evangelism and colonialism becomes a big issue in the U.S. And by the way, it's not just in the United States that this was true. Okay, everywhere that Europeans were going, they were trying to colonize and westernize the peoples that they were encountering. So how would you define colonialism? We know what evangelism is. What's a good definition for colonialism?
Just like making them part of society.
Of whose society?
The English settlers.
Yeah, English or European, whoever it is that is invading their territory, right? Okay, yes. Now, why? Why did these Europeans, most of us, our country was settled by Europeans, right, from England. Why did the Europeans believe it was necessary to convert them to their way of living, their culture?
Because they thought it was better.
Well, they did think it was better, but there's something specific that really drove them to believe they needed to do this. Their goal is to Christianize them, at least one of their goals. Obviously, economics, trade is involved in this too, okay? But they want to Christianize these, and not just the Catholics. I'm talking even the reformers and missionaries that went out, from evangelical groups. So in order for them to be Christianized, something fundamental has to take place. Many of these colonizers, believed that you could not Christianize a group within the pagan culture where they lived. It wouldn't take root. The gospel can't take root. So first you have to, it's like a farmer that goes out and he has to work the soil and change the soil to make it possible to cultivate whatever he's planting. And they had this idea: you can't plant the gospel in a pagan culture. You have to change the culture so that the seed of the gospel will take root. That's an underlying mentality of the colonizers. Okay? Do we still believe that today? Do evangelicals still believe that today when they go places? Reformed missionaries take that mentality with them today.
I think maybe in some sense we do kind of have that mindset, but I think we also learned that you have to like adapt to other people's cultures and understand that the gospel can still work in other cultures.
Okay, good. Does the New Testament practice of missions support that thesis?
All became all things to all people,
Okay,
and Timothy became circumcised.
all right. You never see Paul or any of his team, going into a particular location, trying to lay a foundation culturally to convert them to a certain culture in order to lead them to Christ. He goes in and immediately preaches the gospel. And he what's the big word we use to describe that practice of planting the gospel seed within the culture that's there? Big missions word that we use to describe that practice. Of not trying to convert the culture to a Christian culture, but taking the gospel in the oops, I just gave it away. Contextualization. That's part of the idea of contextualization in missions. You take the gospel and within biblical bounds, okay, you try to plant the seed of the gospel within their cultural context. So contextualization is about that. The danger with contextualization that many have encountered, it's very easy to want to conform to a particular culture to the point of actually sacrificing doctrinal truth for the sake of building bridges to those people. What's the other word that we use when you take contextualization too far and you start mixing your truth claims with some of their pagan ideas? Remember the other word we use for that? That's where the word syncretism comes in. Syncretism is bringing together your truth claims with some of the false ideas of that culture for the sake of building bridges to reach them. It's like Muslims coming to Christ, but not leaving the mosque. They continue going to the mosque in order to build bridges, but now they're praying to Jesus. Okay? So the words contextualization and syncretism are really, really important when you think about colonization. But again, they believed that you had to convert them to, you had to establish a Christian culture. In other words, they viewed their own cultures as Christian. Okay, now they're advancing the Christian culture to these other places. And it becomes a big mess. Just a real big mess. Okay. All right. When we talk about Native Americans, we're talking about a collectivistic culture. What's the opposite of collectivism? Individualism, right. And so here you've got the West, which is largely an individualistic culture, encountering a Native American culture, which is very collectivistic, which means what? What do we mean by collectivism?
Decisions are made together.
Yep. It's the most important aspect of that culture is the group, right? We talk about self-actualization if you have studied Maslow's triangle, right? In the West, the ultimate goal of culture is to help you become self-actualized, very individualistic. But in a Native American culture, it's about the group, okay? And that's going to be a problem. A lot of the missionaries among the Native Americans didn't understand that. And so, who were the first missionaries to these people? Any guesses as to who the first missionaries to Native Americans were? Well, the answer is, the hint I'm going to give you is not good. Who got there first? Who we just get done talking about?
Savior?
Yeah, now the Catholics in general, the Franciscans worked among the Pueblos. Anybody know where the Pueblo lands were? I'll show you a map in just a moment. Here are the Pueblo Indians, like southern Colorado, that part of the country. And then the Jesuits came. There's Xavier's group, right? Loyola. They worked among the Huron Indians. Like I said, I'll give you a map in just a second so you can see this. And they practiced huge syncretism, and they did try to translate the Bible. We give them credit for that. The Catholic missionaries did make an effort to translate the scriptures into the Native American languages. But they were very syncretistic, which means they allowed the Native Americans to maintain many of their pagan ceremonial practices and married them with Catholic doctrine, and this is what they got. In fact, it's probably safe to say, in most of the Catholic world today, there's really a form of rare Catholicism is really hard to find. Much of Catholicism in the world, if not most of it, is syncretistic. They've blended together with local pagan practices. So these are the first ones. And then there's something else that's really fundamental when it comes to Native American missions. And that's the issue of the land. We're talking about the tribal lands that these people had. Does anybody happen to know what the attitude of the Native Americans was toward the land that they lived on, the tribal lands?
Their land was very sacred.
Sacred, yeah, you're right. Can you expand on that? In what way was it sacred?
Didn't really waste anything, like everything got used.
Well, okay, and part of the reason for that is because it was sacred. They felt that they had a responsibility to honor the land, and that was one of the ways they did it. There's something else that's important to think about when it comes to the land. Who owned the land?
Wasn't it like they didn't consider themselves as owning it? It was more like they were more like just caretakers or something. And they lived in there with the animals, and the animals had a say. And they believed all these evil spirits lived in both evil and good spirits lived in everything. Animals,
Yes. Right, very animistic, right? And there's another group of people that were owners of that land that comes into that picture. And that's the ancestors. They believed that ancestors owned that land, so they did not have a right to give it away or sell it. Okay? So here comes these colonizers. What are they all about? They're land grabbers. And not all of them, okay? I think you guys understand. No way am I going to accuse all of the settlers that came in from Europe, England or wherever, of being land grabbers. But in the larger picture, colonizers were known as being land grabbers. They would steal land in some cases. The more decent ones would try to negotiate with the Indians to trade with them for land. And the Indians, at least most of them, said, we can't do that because the land doesn't belong to us. It belongs to our ancestors, and we are caretakers. I've never used that word. We're caretakers of the land, but they did not have a right to sell or give away that land. And the colonizers just didn't get that. To them, hey, land is, they didn't have this concept of ancestors being owners. So there's a lot of conflict that brews because of that. And in some cases, when the Indians refused to sell or give it away, the colonizers took it by force. And so now, not only are the Native Americans upset with them for taking their land, but they're afraid of what the ancestors might do in reaction. They're constantly afraid of curses and punishments coming from the netherworld. So it's just huge, just a mess. It's a real mess. But that's an important concept. Yeah, here's just a couple of maps to conclude with here today. Here's the Pueblo area. You got Arizona, Mesa Verde, Utah, Colorado. Just to kind of give you an idea of where some of these settlements took place. You go to the northeast, and up into Michigan, you can see a lot of, and some of those tribes you'll recognize, the Iroquois, Algonquins become important, and the guy we're going to study next. You don't have to know all of these. I'm just showing there were tons and tons of tribes all over the place. And this is what the colonizers are going to confront. And you know the story, you know what happened in the long run, right? The colonizers used their power and influence to eventually take over all of this land. So,
Can I see that last slide again?
that one,
The one before that.
that one. Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. So, anyway, we'll talk about John Elliott on Wednesday, Lord willing. Okay, there may be 2 or 3 questions about Xavier and this introduction. And then I'll ask you to do your reading. So we will have a quiz on what we've studied today. All right, thank you very much.
Are you gonna do like a lecture, or are we gonna do?
Yeah, we'll still, no, we're gonna, you mean
On Wednesday.
the other book? No, we're not gonna do chapter 2 of the Great Commission book till a week from Friday. Yep, you'll see that on the calendar, on the course schedule. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did you get what you needed, Laurel?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And those, I think I put those PowerPoints on the homepage too, if you need it.
Dr. Mullen.